28. I think we talked about this being on Jacob's chucks, but basically it ought to be called 3-jaw, self-centering drill chucks, because Jacob's is a particular brand made a particular way. It's sort of like referring to all facial tissues as Kleenex. Anyway, let me show you what we got today. Here's an array of chucks. Of these, not a single one is a Jacob's brand chuck. But they're all 3-jaw self-centering. This is one fits a drill. This probably came off of a drill press because it's threaded. Fit on like that. They operate with keys, keyless. And I do have one here that has a brand name. This is an Albrecht chuck, not from the wood turning community, but it has a different kind of a taper on the back. This is for use in my machine tool area. So the chuck's fastened to a taper. The taper then allows us to use it on one of our machines. Generally, the taper we're used to seeing is a Morris taper, either a number 2 or a number 3. Morris tapers, here's a number 3. Here's a number 5 Morris taper. So there's multiple different sizes. For wood lathes, generally, the mini lathes on up through most of the larger lathes use a Morris taper 2 on the tailstock, many on 3 on some. Sometimes the headstock is different, Morris taper 3. So the taper, diameter, pitch, and so on is a function of the number. When you buy one of these devices, I can almost refer to them as a Jacob's chuck again, sometimes they come in 2 pieces. The chuck and a piece that looks like this. Morris taper on one end and a second taper on the opposite end. This is a Jacob's taper. And there are a number of different Jacob's tapers. If you buy one at some companies, you may find it coming in 2 boxes or 2 pieces. The chuck and the associated taper. Now this particular one right here, if I look very carefully at the writing on it, the name is there. Its capacity in terms of the largest to smallest is written on it. And it says JT33. This is a Jacob's taper number 33. So if I bought this chuck and I bought the insert separately, I would know that I need a Morris taper 2 for my lathe on this end and a Jacob's taper number 33 on this end. And if you go to many sources, you can actually specify all of this. So this then goes into here. Jaws retracted, you set it down here, block of wood on it, and a sharp blow with a mallet on the wood will seat that. Provided that this is perfectly clean, free of debris, oil, and the inside here also has been cleaned and degreased, so that when this goes in, it seats firmly. Drill presses, same thing. They look like this. The drills, again, a self-centering. This is a keyless. And on the inside of this, fastened to the drill, is a thread similar to this. This has been screwed on very, very snugly, and by going in through here, we can unloosen the screw and back this off and change it if necessary. So why am I telling you all this? Several reasons. One is, this is a piece of machinery that needs to be maintained like everything else that we have in our shop. And because it's mechanical in nature, it can get loaded with debris, dust, dirt, and begin to become difficult to operate. There's also some characteristics of these things I want to point out. We're going to take this apart in a minute. But before we get started, we'll take the bigger one here simply so we can see it easier. I'm going to extend the jaws out just a little bit. And if you look at a 3-jaw self-centering chuck, I'm going to call them Jacob's, but with a lowercase j, you'll find that each of these jaws has a flat on them. And those flats extend the length of the jaw. And that's what grabs the drill bit perfectly. If those jaws get damaged, you're not going to get a good strong grip. Just as if the taper gets damaged, you're not going to get it to seat into your tailstock or headstock properly. So the other thing is grabbing a drill. If I have, step out of the picture a second. If I have a drill like this with a nice round shaft, it's pretty easy to set it in here. All I have to do is open these jaws, proper direction, and put it in and tighten it. I didn't have to spend a lot of time trying to get this properly centered, which is the case for most high-speed drills or Forstner bits. However, here's another brand of drill bits. This drill bit has 3 flats on it. And for me to put this in here properly, I'll set it in here, and I need to be sure those flats line up with the jaws. Now, because of their flats, they will have a tendency to get loose in the chuck less frequently. So if I put this in wrong, I could have it off center a little bit. So you got to be cautious of that. The other thing to be cautious of, I got a little tiny bit here. If I stick this in wrong, I could end up off center. So I need to close the jaws down to almost the size of my drill bit. Then insert the drill bit. And tighten it in order to make sure it's centered. One of the drilling problems we have many times is smaller bits are put into the jaws off center, and therefore we end up getting this kind of an effect like that. So these smaller bits don't have the rounds, the flats on the sides, like the larger ones do. So if you have a standard set of twist drills, probably not that problem, but if you have some of the other brands, like this set right here, the flats exist on the bigger ones, and we have to be very careful about that. Also know that depending on what chuck size you buy, if it is a keyed chuck, the chuck key has to match. There are different sizes of keys. The key comes with the chuck. Don't get them separated because the larger ones won't fit, the smaller ones will slip, and so they need to be matched. So I want to show you the inside of one brand of chuck. This one's particularly, because it's fairly common, fairly typical of most of the chucks that we're going to find in woodworking. The Jacobs brand chucks are fairly expensive, and many of them actually have ball bearing races inside, which makes them even more complex and more subject to accumulating dust and debris. I'm going to take this apart and show you how it works. If you want to see how a real Jacobs chuck works, much more complex than this one, at the end of this video you'll see a reference to a website from a gentleman who will take one apart, actually cut it apart, and take you inside so you can actually study how a Jacobs brand 3-jaw self-centering chuck actually operates. So I'm going to clear away a little bit here and then take this one apart and show you what the inside of all of these chucks generally look like. Be back in a second. I'm going to take apart one of these chucks. I'm going to choose the keyless one because this type right here requires an arbor press to be the parts pressed apart. I don't have an arbor press. But the nice thing about the screw chuck is it literally unscrews. So I can take the case off. It's fine thread. And set it aside. And you can see these 3 jaws. What I'm going to do is back them down, and then they will come out. Literally just fall out. So I have a plunger in here that pushes these jaws up these slots, and it rides on the inside of this surface. So we have a very smooth surface that rides against here. And we have this little V-shaped surface, which is what actually holds the drill bit. And so if this surface is damaged, abraded, or just plain dirty, it's not going to get a good grip. If this slot doesn't ride smoothly in here, we're going to have to fight this chuck to get it open and closed. So all these mechanical sliding components need to be kept clean. I would say a solvent to clean it. I wouldn't lubricate it with oil. I'd lubricate it with a little silicone spray. And then once these parts have all been cleaned and sprayed, these three jaws are all the same, by the way. They'll drop into any of the three locations. In a real Jacobs chuck, Jacobs brand chuck, these jaws actually have teeth cut on them, very similar to your 4-jaw scroll chuck. And so because each tooth is unique, they have to go in a specific order, and it's specified. So I'd love you to look at the video we referenced at the end of this and see how a real Jacobs chuck comes apart. Much more complex, but most of them are like this. Put it back together again. The jaw with the V shape drops down into the slot. Down into the slot. Third one. Down into the slot. And I'm going to advance the chuck a little bit. This locks them into these slots almost. I forgot that one didn't lock in. So I'm going to come back down, holding these two jaws. Put this one back in place again. Hold all three. Advance it. Slide the body over. And screw it back on. Because these jaws are not unique, they will always line up. Nice thing about the less expensive chucks, taking them apart and repairing them is much less complicated. So my point today in this short video was to give you some familiarity with your 3-jaw self-centering drill chucks, commonly known as our Jacobs chucks. And recognize that this is a mechanical component that needs to be maintained, kept clean, lubricated like any other component for it to do its job the best. Hope this helped. See you in the next video.